Brielle had not planned to humiliate herself in front of the entire kingdom tonight, but there she stood, center of the great hall, 300 noble wolves staring at her like she had crawled out of the drains, which, honestly, was not far from the truth. Her apron was still damp from scrubbing the scullery floor. A streak of ash cut diagonally across her cheek, where she had swiped her face with the back of her hand an hour ago. Her braid, already loose from a full day of hauling water and polishing silver, had given up entirely, and dark copper strands hung around her face like she had lost a fight with the wind. And the Alpha King of Valthyris, Calum Aldrich Voss, had just called her name. Not a noble daughter draped in silk. Not Lady Orenna, whose father commanded the eastern provinces. Not any of the high-born women who had spent months maneuvering for this exact moment. The choosing ceremony, where the king would publicly declare his intended mate before the court. He had chosen her, the maid who polished his floors. The silence was so absolute Brielle could hear her own heartbeat, which was unfortunate because it sounded like a trapped rabbit trying to kick its way out of her ribcage. She looked at him, standing on the raised dais in full ceremonial black, the silver circlet resting against his dark hair, and waited for the correction. Because there had to be a correction. Kings did not choose scullery maids. This was a mistake, a joke, a fever dream brought on by the lye fumes she had been breathing all afternoon. But Calum was not laughing. His pale gray eyes were locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees feel like they had been replaced with wet cloth. His jaw was set, his posture rigid, and he carried the same lethal calm he wore on the battlefield. He meant it. Around her, the silence cracked. A ripple of whispers spread through the hall like fire through dry grass. She caught fragments. Impossible. A servant. Has he lost his mind? Lady Orenna stood frozen near the front of the gathered nobility, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, and a fury so white-hot it could have melted iron. Her father, Lord Castian, had gone rigid beside her, his knuckles white around the stem of his goblet. Brielle's legs refused to move. She stood rooted to the stone floor, her hands still red and rough from the day's work, and tried to remember how to breathe. The king's chancellor, a thin man named Haddon, leaned toward Calum and murmured something urgent. Calum's gaze did not leave Brielle. Whatever Haddon said, the king dismissed it with a single word that Brielle could not hear, but the chancellor clearly did, because he went pale and stepped back. Then the king descended the dais. 300 people watched him cross the hall. His boots struck the stone with measured precision. The crowd parted around him like water splitting before a blade. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and for the first time, she saw something beneath the steel. Uncertainty. Brief. Quickly buried, but real. He extended his hand. The hall held its breath. Brielle looked at his hand, calloused and scarred across the knuckles, and then back at his face. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Every rational thought told her this was impossible and would end in ruin. But something deeper, something buried so far down she had no name for it, pulled her forward. She placed her rough, soap-cracked hand in his. A murmur detonated through the court. Calum closed his fingers around hers, and the contact sent a jolt through her arm that settled behind her ribs like a second heartbeat. His eyes widened fractionally, as though he had felt it too. He turned, her hand in his, and walked her back toward the dais. Brielle followed on legs that did not feel like her own, the whispers rising around her like a tide, and one thought pulsed through her mind louder than all the rest. What has he done? What have I done? That was 2 hours ago. Now Brielle sat in a chamber she had cleaned 100 times but never imagined sitting in, perched on a velvet chair that probably cost more than everything she had ever owned combined. Her hands were shaking. She tucked them under her thighs. The door opened. Haddon entered, his face carefully neutral in the way that meant he was furious. The king has retired to his quarters, Haddon said. You will remain here until morning. Guards have been posted. Am I a guest or a prisoner? Brielle asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Haddon's mouth thinned. That remains to be seen. He studied her for a moment. Do you understand what happened tonight? The king chose me, Brielle said, the words sounding absurd even as she spoke them. The king defied every tradition, every alliance, and every expectation this court has held for the last 3 years, Haddon corrected. Lord Castian's daughter was the presumed match. The eastern provinces supply 40% of our grain. Do you understand what that means? Brielle understood exactly what it meant. It meant the king had chosen a nobody over political stability, and it meant someone was going to pay for it. Why did he do it? She whispered. Haddon's face flickered, something almost like bewilderment passing behind his careful mask. That is precisely what the entire court would like to know. He left. The lock clicked behind him. Brielle sat alone and tried to make sense of a world that had tilted completely off its axis. She did not sleep. The summons came at dawn. A guard led Brielle through corridors she knew intimately from the servant's side, passages she had swept and mopped on her hands and knees for years. But now she walked through the main halls, past portraits of former kings, under chandeliers she had dusted from rickety ladders, and every step felt like trespassing. Inside the council chamber, Calum sat at the head of a long oak table. Haddon stood to his right. To his left sat a woman Brielle had never seen before, silver-haired with sharp dark eyes that tracked Brielle the moment she entered. The woman wore healer's gray, and her gaze was clinical, assessing, cataloging. Sit, Calum said. Brielle sat. The chair was too large for her. She felt like a child called before the headmaster. Do you know why I chose you? Calum asked. No, Your Majesty. Something shifted in his face. Neither does anyone else. That presents a problem. Brielle blinked. You do not know why you chose me? The silver-haired woman made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Calum's jaw tightened. I know why. The court does not. And until they do, you are in danger. He leaned forward slightly. Lord Castian is furious. His daughter was humiliated publicly. The Eastern lords are already discussing withdrawal of their grain shipments. Half the court believes I have gone mad, and the other half believes you used witchcraft. I scrub floors for a living, Brielle said flatly. When would I have had time to learn witchcraft? The silver-haired woman definitely laughed that time. This is Thessaly, Calum said, gesturing to the woman. She is the court physician, and the only person in this castle aside from Haddon whom I trust completely. Thessaly inclined her head. I examined your living quarters this morning while you were being held. I also reviewed the castle's records of your service. No disciplinary marks, no unusual behavior, no contact with anyone outside the castle walls. You searched my room? Brielle asked. Thoroughly, Thessaly confirmed without apology. Brielle's cheeks flushed. She owned almost nothing. A spare dress, a comb with missing teeth, a pressed flower from the castle garden she had stolen 2 summers ago and kept in a book she had borrowed and never returned. The thought of someone cataloging the full poverty of her life made her stomach clench. There is nothing remarkable about your background, Thessaly continued. No family connections, no pack lineage on record. You were left at the castle gate as an infant. You have been a ward of the crown since birth. I know my own history, Brielle said, her voice tight. Then you understand why the court finds the king's choice inexplicable, Thessaly replied. The words stung more than they should have. Enough, Calum said. His tone was quiet, but the authority in it silenced the room instantly. He looked at Brielle, and something in his gaze softened. I did not choose you to punish you. Then why? She could not keep the desperation from her voice. Calum was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, it was lower, stripped of royal formality. Because when I stood on that dais and looked out at every eligible woman in this kingdom, my wolf recognized only you. The words settled over the room like a held breath. Your wolf, Brielle repeated. A true mate bond, Thessaly clarified. The king is claiming he felt a genuine, instinctive recognition. I am not claiming it, Caleb said, an edge entering his tone. It happened. True mate bonds were the stuff of old stories, legends from an age when wolves still ran wild. In modern Valthuris, marriages were strategic. No king in living memory had chosen a mate based on instinct. And yet she had felt it too. That jolt when their hands touched. The second heartbeat behind her ribs that was still there now, faint but persistent, timed to his rhythm across the table. What happens now? Brielle asked. Now, Caleb said, we prove to the court that this is real. Before Castian turns the Eastern Lords against the crown. The door burst open. A young guard stumbled in, breathless. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but Lord Castian has called his bannermen home. All of them. The grain wagons have stopped at the Eastern Bridge. Caleb's face did not change, but Brielle saw his fingers tighten around the edge of the table until the wood groaned. How long before the capital feels the shortage? He asked Haddon. 3 weeks, perhaps 4. Caleb stood. He looked at Brielle one more time, and in that look, she saw something that made her stomach drop. He had chosen her knowing this would happen. He had chosen her anyway. Thessaly, he said. Begin the examination. I want proof within the week. He left. Brielle sat in the too large chair and turned to find Thessaly watching her with a look that was half fascination, half pity. Well then, Thessaly said, let us find out what you are. Thessaly's examination room was in the East Tower, a circular space lined with shelves of glass jars, bundles of dried herbs, and books so old their spines had disintegrated into dust. The morning light came through narrow windows and fell in pale slices across the stone floor. Sit on the table, Thessaly instructed. Brielle sat, her legs dangling over the edge. The healer moved around her, pressing fingertips to her temples, her throat, the pulse points at her wrists. Have you ever shifted? Thessaly asked. Brielle shook her head. Never. Not once. Thessaly paused. You are 23 years old and you have never shifted? My wolf has always been quiet, Brielle said. She had learned to say it matter-of-factly, without the shame that used to accompany it. In a kingdom of shifters, being unable to shift was like being unable to walk. The other servants used to joke that my wolf was sleeping. Eventually they stopped joking and just stopped mentioning it. A dormant wolf is rare. It usually indicates suppression, either from trauma or from something blocking the shift. Nothing traumatic happened to me, Brielle said. My life has been extremely ordinary, aggressively ordinary. You were abandoned as an infant with no record of parentage, Thessaly pointed out. That is ordinary for a foundling. It is ordinary for a foundling, Thessaly agreed. It is not ordinary for a king's true mate. The words hung between them. Brielle looked down at her hands, still rough and reddened from yesterday's work, and tried to reconcile them with the phrase, king's true mate. You feel the connection, Thessaly said. It was not a question. Brielle hesitated, then nodded once. Like a thread, pulled tight between my chest and somewhere outside of me. Thessaly's eyebrows rose. You can sense his location? Brielle concentrated. Below us, south side of the castle, moving. Thessaly crossed to the window. After a moment, she turned back. He is crossing the south courtyard toward the war room. That level of awareness this early is highly unusual. Is that good or bad? It is interesting, Thessaly replied, which was not reassuring at all. Over the following 3 days, Thessaly ran every test Brielle had ever heard of, and several she had not. Scent analysis, Aura readings, wolfsbane response, alpha howl provocations. Nothing triggered a shift. Your wolf is there, Thessaly told her on the third evening. Every test confirms it. Strong, in fact, unusually so. But it will not surface. She had been given new quarters, new clothes, meals in a private dining room. And yet she had never felt more out of place. Has the king asked about me? Brielle said, trying to sound casual and failing. Thessaly looked up from her notes. He asks every evening. What does he ask? Whether you are eating, whether you are sleeping, whether anyone has threatened you, whether you have shifted. What do you tell him? The truth, that you eat like a sparrow, sleep poorly, have received 14 anonymous threats slipped under your door in 3 days, and have not shifted. Brielle's stomach dropped. 14 threats? You did not read them? I thought they were from Haddon. He keeps sending me etiquette manuals. Thessaly almost smiled. Some were etiquette manuals, some were death threats. I have been collecting them before you wake. Brielle opened her mouth, closed it, then said, I would like to go back to scrubbing floors now. Unfortunately, that is no longer an option. Thessaly set down her notes. The king has requested a private meeting with you this evening, and Lord Castian has formally demanded the choosing be annulled. The walk to his private study took 7 minutes. Brielle counted every step. The guard opened the door and she stepped inside. The room was smaller than she expected. Warmer. A fire burned low in the hearth, and the walls were lined with maps rather than portraits. It felt less like a throne room and more like a den. Calum stood by the window, his back to her. He had removed his formal jacket and stood in a simple dark shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows. The informality startled her. She had only ever seen him in full court attire or armor. He turned when the door closed. For a moment neither of them spoke. You look tired, he said. So do you, Brielle replied before she could stop herself. Then she winced. It was honest, he said. I prefer honest. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Brielle sat, aware of the fatigue etched around his eyes. He did look tired, the kind of tired that went deeper than a few sleepless nights. Thessaly tells me you have received death threats, he said, sitting across from her. She tells me you ask about my eating habits, Brielle countered. His ears went faintly red. The sight of the Alpha King blushing was so unexpected that Brielle nearly laughed. She swallowed it, but something in her loosened. The annulment demand, she said. Is it serious? Castian has allies. If it cannot be verified, the council has the authority to override a choosing. It has not happened in 200 years, but the precedent exists. Then I would be expected to choose again from the approved candidates. His tone was flat, but she could feel something through the thread between them. A fierce refusal. You would refuse, she said. He looked at her sharply. You felt that? She had not meant to reveal it. I feel things sometimes. Impressions. He leaned forward, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. What do you feel right now? Brielle closed her eyes and focused on the thread. Stubbornness. Anger. Not at me. She paused. And underneath, something you are trying very hard to keep buried. When she opened her eyes, he was closer, leaning toward her, stripped of his usual armor. What is it? She asked softly. Fear, he said, and the admission seemed to cost him. That I have destroyed your life by choosing you. She stared at this man who commanded armies and terrified lords, and saw beneath it someone afraid he had ruined a person who did not deserve to be ruined. You have not destroyed my life, Brielle said. My life was scrubbing floors and sleeping in a closet. You have complicated it enormously, but not destroyed it. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. There is a faction pushing for my removal, he said. The choosing was supposed to solidify my position through a strategic alliance. Instead, I chose you, and gave them ammunition. Enough to load every cannon in the kingdom, Brielle said. He searched her face. You would stand before the court and submit to their scrutiny? I scrubbed their floors on my knees. Standing upright in front of them will be an improvement. This time, he did smile. Small, reluctant, but real. And something between them flared warm, like a match catching in the dark. A sharp knock cut through the moment. Haddon entered without waiting. Your Majesty, Lady Orenna has formally challenged the bond claim. She is invoking the right of contention. If the connection cannot be demonstrated within 7 days, she will petition for your abdication. Brielle felt the color drain from her face. 7 days? Calum said quietly. The king looked at Brielle. She looked back. And in the silence between them, something pulled taut, humming with everything they had not yet said. The proving began the next morning. Thessaly had devised a series of demonstrations designed to convince even the most hostile skeptic. The problem, Brielle quickly discovered, was that proving a connection required proximity to the Alpha King, and proximity to the Alpha King was its own kind of torment. The first test was conducted in the Great Hall, before a gallery of nobles who watched with the enthusiasm of people attending an execution. Lady Orenna sat in the front row, her posture immaculate, her face carved from marble. Brielle stood on a raised platform beside Calum, feeling approximately as comfortable as a mouse standing next to a hawk. He was in full formal attire, every inch the king. She was wearing the nicest dress she had ever owned, which still looked like servant's clothing compared to the silks surrounding her. They stood 10 feet apart. The invisible tether between them hummed. The distance ached like a bruised rib. Closer now, Thessaly instructed. They stepped toward each other. 5 feet. The ache eased slightly. 3 feet. Brielle could feel warmth radiating from him, could smell something rich and deep that she had no name for, but that made her wolf stir for the first time in years. Not a shift, not even close, but a flicker, a twitch of awareness deep inside her, like something very old turning over in its sleep. Take her hand, Your Majesty, Thessaly said. Calum took her hand. A pulse of warmth radiated up her arm and spread through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She heard him inhale sharply. His fingers tightened around hers. Thessaly held up a crystal sphere cradled in silver wire that glowed faintly amber. Resonance confirmed. Their signatures have synchronized. This level of attunement is consistent with a true connection. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some faces showed grudging surprise. Others remained hostile. Orenna did not react at all, which somehow felt worse than open contempt. Parlor tricks, Lord Castian called from the gallery. He rose from his seat, tall and angular, silver-thraked hair swept back from a face built for disapproval. Pulse synchronization can be mimicked with basic enchantments. Any hedge witch could produce this result. A rumble of agreement from the Eastern Lords. Then I propose a more rigorous test, Thessaly said calmly. Brielle will be removed from the hall. The king will be relocated to a position unknown to her. She will identify his location from anywhere in the castle, without sight, sound, or scent to guide her. Castian's eyes narrowed. My own physician will verify there are no enchantments. Agreed, Calum said. It was the first word he had spoken since the demonstration began. 2 hours later, Brielle stood blindfolded in the entrance hall with a physician she did not trust, pressing cold fingers to her temples and declaring her free of magical influence. The blindfold came off. Find him, Thessaly said. Brielle closed her eyes. The thread was there, steady and persistent, tugging gently left. She followed it. Down a corridor, past the kitchen she knew so well, through a passage that led to the north wing. The pull intensified with each step. Stronger. Warmer. She climbed a narrow staircase, turned right, and stopped in front of a closed door. She could feel him behind it. Not just his presence, but his state. He was worried. Not about the test. About her. About whether this was too much. About whether the court was breaking her down. She pushed the door open. Calum stood by the window of a small library, his arms crossed. But when he saw her, something in his shoulders released. "Found you," she said quietly. The court physician who had followed her stood in the doorway, his mouth slightly open. He turned to the trailing noble witnesses and said simply, "No enchantment could account for this." The gallery session that followed was tense but decisive. Thessaly presented her findings. Castian's physician conceded the evidence appeared genuine. The court rumbled with grudging acknowledgement. But Orenna did not concede. She sat perfectly still through the entire presentation, and when it ended, she rose with fluid grace. A connection alone does not make a queen. The right of contention does not merely ask whether a bond exists. It asks whether the chosen mate is worthy of the crown. The hall went silent. "I challenge Brielle of no name and no lineage to the trial of worth," Orenna declared. "Let her prove she deserves to stand beside the king. Or let her step aside for someone who does." Brielle felt the color drain from her face. She did not know what the trial of worth entailed, but the predatory satisfaction in Orenna's eyes told her it was nothing good. Calum's hand found hers under the table. His grip was iron. She felt something volcanic inside him, a fury so intense it burned. But his tone, when he spoke, was perfectly controlled. "The trial of worth has not been invoked in over a century." "The precedent stands," Orenna replied smoothly. "Unless the king wishes to overrule ancient law before the entire court." Checkmate. If Calum refused, he appeared to be shielding a mate he knew was unworthy. If he accepted, Brielle faced whatever nightmare the trial demanded. "I accept," Brielle said. Every head in the room turned toward her, including Calum's. She could feel his shock, his protest forming before he could speak. She squeezed his hand once, hard, and stood. "I accept the trial of worth," she repeated, her voice carrying further than she expected. "Name your terms." Orenna smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "You should not have done that," Calum said. They were in his study, the fire burning low, the maps on the walls flickering in amber light. She could feel the storm raging inside him. Not anger at her exactly. Something closer to terror dressed up as frustration. "If I had not accepted, you would have had to refuse on my behalf," Brielle said. "And that would have made you look weak. I do not care how I look. You are a king. How you look is half of what keeps you alive." He stared at her, and she watched the conflict play across his face. He wanted to argue. He wanted to overrule her, lock her in a tower somewhere safe, and fight this battle himself. She could feel all of it pouring through the thread like water through a cracked dam. "She planned this," Brielle said. "Orenna did not invoke that trial on impulse. She knew about my wolf before she ever stood up in that hall." Calum's silence confirmed it. "Which means she has been watching me," Brielle continued. "Gathering information, waiting for the perfect moment to strike where I am weakest. This was never about proving anything. This is about destroying me in a way that destroys you." The look he gave her was sharp with reluctant admiration. "You see it clearly. I spent years being invisible in this castle. You learn a great deal about people when they do not know you are watching." "The trial has 3 stages," he said finally, turning to pace toward the window. "The first tests the mind, a problem-solving challenge judged by the council. Orenna is educated, sharp, and trained in statecraft since childhood. She will have every advantage." Brielle swallowed but kept steady. "The second tests the body," he continued. "A physical contest. Orenna has trained with blades since she was 9. Her father made certain of it. And the third? Brielle asked. He did not turn from the window. The third tests the wolf. The silence that followed was suffocating. I cannot shift, Brielle whispered. I know. Orenna knew too. Of course she did. Every servant in the castle gossiped, and Brielle's dormant wolf was the most well-known secret in Valthyris. Orenna had chosen this trial specifically because the third stage was impossible for Brielle. If you reach the third trial and cannot shift, it will not simply mean you lose, he said, turning to face her. You will be declared unworthy before the entire kingdom. They will strip the choosing, deny everything, and remove you from the castle. The last words hit her like a blow. Removed. Cast out. She would lose not just him, but the only home she had ever known. And then what happens to you? She asked. Castian's faction calls for abdication. Without the connection to justify my decision, I will have demonstrated instability. Choosing a wolfless servant over a lord's daughter. He paused. They will say I am unfit, and they will have enough votes to make it stick. She felt the full architecture of the trap closing around them both. Orenna did not need to defeat Calum directly. She only needed to prove that his chosen mate was broken, and the court would do the rest. Then I will find a way to shift, Brielle said. In 4 days? I have been quiet my entire life. I scrubbed and cleaned and stayed invisible because that was what was expected. Nobody expected anything from me, so I expected nothing from myself. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Maybe my wolf is not sleeping. Maybe she has been waiting. Something shifted in his face. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a flicker of something fierce. The desperate want to believe. He reached out and tucked a strand of loose hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, careful. The hands of a man who led armies, but was terrified of breaking something small. I will not let them take you from me, he said quietly. It was the first time he had said anything that acknowledged she was his. Not the arrangement, not the politics. Her. You might have to let me fight for myself, she said softly. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, and she watched his gaze drop to her mouth for one unguarded moment before he caught himself and stepped back. Thessaly will work with you, he said, rougher than before. If there is any way to reach your wolf, she will find it. He paused at the door without looking back. Brielle, the candle in your room, the fire being lit before you arrive each evening, that is not the servants. Her heart hammered. I know, she said. He left without another word. Brielle stood alone in the firelight, her cheek still warm where he had touched her, and pressed her hand to her sternum. Wake up, she whispered. Please. I need you now. Nothing answered. Thessaly pushed her hard. For 3 days straight, from dawn until her body gave out, Brielle was subjected to every known method of triggering a dormant wolf. Herbal infusions that burned going down and left her shaking. Meditation exercises designed to open the channel between human consciousness and wolf instinct. Controlled stress responses, cold water immersion, elevated heartbeat, sensory deprivation. Nothing worked. Again, Thessaly would say each time Brielle collapsed on the examination table, drenched in sweat with nothing to show for it. And Brielle would drag herself upright and try again. On the second evening, she sat on the floor of Thessaly's tower room, exhausted beyond words, her head resting against the stone wall. What if it never wakes? She asked. Thessaly was quiet for a long time. Then she set down her vial and sat across from Brielle on the floor, something she had never done. The informality of it, this precise clinical woman lowering herself to Brielle's level, made her throat tighten. When I was young, Thessaly said, my mother told me that some wolves are not dormant. They are guarded. Guarded by what? By the wolf itself. A wolf will sometimes seal its own power away to protect its host from something. A trauma. A threat. A truth the host is not ready to face. Thessaly paused. Your wolf may not be sleeping, Brielle. She may be shielding you. From what? That is what we need to find out. Brielle pressed her palms against the cold stone floor and closed her eyes. She reached inward, past the exhaustion, past the fear, searching for the presence she had felt flicker during the proving. It was there, faint but warm, curled deep inside her like an ember buried in ash. I can feel her, Brielle whispered. She is there, but it is like reaching through a wall. The wall may be for your protection, Thessaly said gently, but walls built for protection can also become prisons. That night, Brielle could not sleep. She lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, the candle he always left burning casting dancing shadows on the stone. She thought about walls, about the one inside her, and about all the other walls she had built throughout her life. The wall between herself and wanting things. The wall between herself and belonging. The wall between herself and the terrifying possibility that she might matter. A knock came at the door. Soft. Hesitant. Not the confident rap of a guard or the brisk efficiency of Thessaly. She opened it. Caleb stood in the corridor, wearing a simple linen shirt and dark trousers. No circlet, no armor, no insignia. Just a man standing in front of a closed door, looking uncertain for the second time since she had known him. I could not sleep, he said. Neither could I. They stood on either side of the threshold, and the pull between them hummed, warm and aching and impossible to ignore. May I come in? He asked. Brielle stepped aside. He entered the small room, and his presence immediately overwhelmed it. He was too tall, too broad, too much for a space designed for a servant. He looked at the narrow bed, the bare walls, the single shelf holding her spare dress and the old comb. This is where they put you? He asked, an edge creeping in. It is considerably better than my previous room, Brielle replied. That one did not have a window. He turned to face her, and the raw look on his face made her breath stutter. I should have given you proper quarters. You gave me a candle and a warm fire every night. That is more than anyone has given me in my entire life. Something in him broke. She saw it happen. The precise moment the last wall between king and man crumbled, and before she could prepare herself, he crossed the small room and pulled her against him. His arms wrapped around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, and he held her like she was the most precious and most fragile thing he had ever touched. His heart thundered against her cheek. I am terrified, he said into her hair. Not of the trial, not of Castian, of you being hurt because of me, of being the reason your life becomes a war when all you deserved was peace. Brielle pulled back just enough to look up at him. His gray eyes were glassy, unguarded in a way that made her heart fracture. My life was not peace, she said. My life was silence. There is a difference. She could feel the exact moment he stopped fighting it. His hand came up to cup her jaw, tilting her face toward his. If I kiss you, he murmured, I will not be able to pretend this is only political. Then stop pretending, she said. He kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively, but with the fierce tenderness of someone who had been holding himself back and had finally let go. Brielle grabbed the front of his shirt with both fists and held on. Something between them roared to life, blazing gold, and somewhere deep inside her, behind the wall, her wolf threw itself against the barrier so hard the ground beneath Brielle's feet seemed to shake. They broke apart, breathing hard. His forehead rested against hers. Tomorrow, she whispered. Whatever happens. Together, he said. She fell asleep that night with the warmth of that moment still wrapped around her like a blanket. And deep inside her, behind the cracked wall, something golden opened its eyes. On the third morning, Caleb came to the tower. Brielle was mid-exercise, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her eyes closed, sweat dampening her hairline. She felt him before she heard him. He sat on the floor in front of her, mirroring her position. The sight of the Alpha King sitting cross-legged on stone was so incongruous that Brielle almost laughed. "The trial is tomorrow," he said. "I am aware. You have not shifted." "Also aware." Something cracked behind his composure. "I am going to cancel it. I will overrule the council and face whatever follows." "No. Brielle. No. You will not sacrifice your throne to protect me." "I would sacrifice considerably more than my throne," he said, and the raw honesty of it stole her breath. "When I was 5 years old," Brielle said quietly, "I asked the head cook why no one ever came to claim me. She told me some people are simply not wanted. I believed her for 18 years. His face shattered. "I stopped reaching," she continued. "I made myself small and invisible because that felt safer than wanting something and being told I was not enough. My wolf did not go dormant because something was wrong with me. She went dormant because I told her to. Because I was so afraid of being seen, of reaching for something and being rejected, that I buried the most powerful part of myself." Tears slid down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. "I am done hiding," she said. "Tomorrow I will stand before that court, and I will face whatever comes. Not because I am brave, but because you chose me, and I refuse to make you regret it." He took her face in both hands and pressed his forehead against hers. His breathing was ragged. She could feel his hands trembling against her skin. "I could never regret you," he said. And his voice broke on the last word. They stayed like that, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, the connection between them blazing. Brielle felt her wolf stir again, not a flicker this time, but a heartbeat of its own, responding to his nearness, to the safety of being held by someone who would move heaven and earth before letting her be harmed. But it was not enough. The wall held. That night, alone once more, Brielle lay awake and thought about Orena's cold smile, about Castien's calculating eyes, about Calum's trembling hands on her face. And deep inside her, buried beneath years of silence and self-erasure, something stirred. Not a flicker, not a gentle pulse, a growl. Low, steady, and furious. Brielle whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow." The growl intensified, then, just as quickly, it retreated behind the wall. But the wall had cracked. And through the crack, something golden burned. The morning of the trial dawned cold and bright. Frost clung to the castle windows, and Brielle's breath misted in the air as she dressed in the simple white tunic and trousers that tradition demanded of the challenged. Thessaly arrived at her door with a cup of something hot and bitter. "Drink it. It will steady your hands." Brielle drank. It tasted like regret and burnt roots. "What is this?" "Something my mother used to give me before exams," Thessaly said. "It does absolutely nothing medicinal, but the ritual helps." Brielle almost laughed. Almost. The great hall had been transformed. The long tables had been cleared and replaced by a single raised platform in the center of the room. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Nobles, advisors, military commanders, and servants who had crammed themselves into the upper balconies where they were technically not permitted. The entire kingdom had come to watch the Maid fall. Orena stood on the far side of the platform, dressed in deep crimson, her dark hair pulled back in a severe braid that made her cheekbones look sharp enough to cut glass. She looked like a weapon disguised as a woman. Beside her, Lord Castien sat in the front row, serene with the confidence of someone who had already won. Calum sat on the elevated throne at the head of the hall. Tradition forbade him from intervening. He could watch. He could not speak, could not object, could not lift a finger to help her. Brielle glanced at him as she took her position. His face was a mask of controlled stillness, but she could feel him, a roaring inferno of protectiveness held behind iron discipline. She sent back calm, steady, a lie, but a convincing one. The trial of mind presented both women with an identical scenario, a simulated crisis involving famine in the Western Territories, conflicting reports from regional governors, a potential plague in the livestock, and limited resources. They had 1 hour to present their solution. Orenna went first. Her presentation was flawless, precise, strategic, delivered with the polished confidence of someone raised to command. She cited historical precedents by name and proposed a tiered response prioritizing economic stability. The council nodded along. Several members exchanged approving glances. Then it was Brielle's turn. She stood before the council with no formal education, no political training. Her hands trembled at her sides. She could feel the gallery waiting for her to fail. But Brielle had spent years in the kitchens, in the infirmary, in every functional corner of this castle. She had listened to servants complain about grain shipments arriving moldy. She had watched the head cook stretch supplies when deliveries ran short. She did not cite precedents. She cited people. The Western villages will not wait for a tiered response, she said, her voice unsteady at first but strengthening as she spoke. 3 years ago, a grain blight hit the southern farmlands, and the castle's response took 6 weeks to reach the outer villages. 14 people died, not from the blight itself, but from the panic that followed, because when people believe help is not coming, they stop helping each other. The hall went quiet. You do not solve a famine by moving numbers on a ledger, Brielle continued. You send healers first, not grain, because sick livestock spreads fear faster than hunger. You establish local supply chains using the stores the villages already have. And you tell the governors the truth, because the moment you start managing information instead of managing the crisis, you have already lost. Several council members were leaning forward. One was writing something down. Haddon cleared his throat. The council will deliberate. The result came back in 20 minutes. The first trial is a draw. Both candidates demonstrated competence. Orenna's composure tightened almost imperceptibly. She had expected to dominate. The draw rattled her, and Brielle saw it. The trial of body began immediately. A combat ring marked in chalk on the stone floor. No weapons, no shifting. Hand to hand until one yielded or was forced from the ring. Orenna was trained. Brielle was not. The first 60 seconds were devastating. Orenna moved like water, fluid and precise, and her first strike caught Brielle across the jaw hard enough to make stars explode behind her eyes. A kick to the ribs, an elbow to the shoulder. Brielle hit the edge of the ring and felt the chalk line beneath her heel. One more step and she was out. She could feel Calem's agony, the effort it took him not to move, not to roar, not to leap from the throne and end this. His restraint was a living thing, trembling under its own weight. Orenna closed in. Yield, she said, low enough that only Brielle could hear. Save yourself the humiliation. We both know you cannot shift. Her lip was split, and her ribs ached with every breath. Every rational thought told her to step back, cross the line, and end the pain. Instead, she remembered the kitchens. She remembered hauling sacks of flour up 3 flights of stairs every morning, scrubbing stone floors on her hands and knees until her shoulders burned, wringing sheets so heavy with water that her forearms had become ropes of lean muscle beneath skin no one ever looked at twice. Orenna was trained. Brielle was built. She dropped low under Orenna's next strike and drove her shoulder into the noblewoman's midsection with the full force of a body shaped by years of labor. Orenna's breath left her in a shocked gasp. She staggered and Brielle followed, not with technique, but with relentless, unyielding pressure, pushing, driving, refusing to stop. Orenna's heel caught the chalk line. Her eyes went wide. Brielle shoved. Orenna stumbled back, one foot crossing the boundary, and the hall erupted. The upper balconies, packed with servants who had watched one of their own fight back, roared with a sound that shook dust from the rafters. Even some nobles were on their feet. Brielle stood in the ring, breathing hard, bruised and battered, and met Calem's eyes across the hall. She felt his pride, fierce and blazing and barely contained. His hands gripped the arms of the throne so tightly the wood groaned. But the celebration died quickly, because the third trial was next. The trial of the wolf. Haddon's voice cut through the noise. The challenged will now demonstrate her wolf before the court. She must hold a full shift for no less than 30 seconds. An eternity for someone who had never shifted once in her life. Orenna stood at the edge of the ring, a thin smile curving her lips. She knew. Everyone knew. This was where it ended. Brielle closed her eyes. She reached inward, past the pain in her ribs, past the fear, past every voice that had ever told her she was not enough. She found the wall, cracked now, fractured in a dozen places. Golden light bled through the fissures. She pushed. The wall did not move. She pushed harder, throwing everything she had against it. The wall held. Murmurs began to ripple through the gallery. 5 seconds. 10. Then she felt him. Not the distant thread she had grown accustomed to. Calem's presence slammed into her awareness like a door thrown open. She could feel his wolf rising beneath his skin in response to hers, the full devastating force of a true mate bond at maximum resonance. And with it came a feeling, not words exactly, but a truth pressed through with such fierce clarity it brought tears to her eyes. You are not unwanted. You were never unwanted. You are mine, and I am yours, and I will spend every day of my life proving it. Something inside Brielle broke open. Not the wall. She broke it. She reached through the cracks with both hands and tore it apart from the inside, and the thing sealed behind it for 23 years surged forward like a river breaking a dam. The shift hit her like lightning. It was not gentle. It was not gradual. It was an explosion of golden light so bright that half the gallery threw their hands over their eyes. When the light faded, a wolf stood in the center of the ring. She was enormous, nearly as large as the king's own legendary form. Her fur blazed like molten gold, catching the light from every window and throwing it back in radiant waves. Her amber eyes burned with intelligence and power that made the air itself feel heavy. A golden wolf, the rarest form in recorded history. The mark of a bloodline so ancient it predated the kingdom itself. The silence was absolute. Then Orenna took a step backward. Involuntary, instinctive, the reaction of a wolf recognizing something that outranked her on a level beyond politics or breeding. Lord Castian rose slowly from his seat, his face drained of color. Haddon dropped the scroll he was holding. And on the throne, Calem leaned forward, his composure finally, completely shattered. She felt his shock, his awe, and beneath it all, a joy so profound it made her golden wolf throw back her head and howl. The sound filled the great hall, reverberating off stone and glass and bone. It was not a cry of victory. It was a declaration. I am here. I have always been here. Always, and I will never hide again. The 30 seconds had long since passed. Brielle shifted back, standing barefoot, trembling, tears streaming down her face. The hall remained frozen. Then, from the upper balcony, a single servant began to clap. Another joined. Then 10 more. Then the entire balcony was thundering with applause, and it spread downward through the gallery like a wave crashing over stone. Calem descended from the throne. He crossed the hall in long, purposeful strides, and the crowd parted before him. He reached Brielle, cupped her face in both hands, and kissed her in front of the entire court. The applause became a roar. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Golden Wolf," he breathed, half laughing, half disbelieving. Of course you are. Brielle laughed through her tears. I did not know. I know, he said, and kissed her again. Behind them, Orenna stood motionless at the edge of the ring. Lord Castian had not moved from his seat. The fight was over. And somewhere deep inside her, the golden wolf settled into place like a key turning in a lock, warm and fierce, and finally, home. The days that followed the trial were a blur of ceremony and upheaval. The court's reaction was not uniform. The servants and common folk celebrated openly, their cheers echoing through the corridors whenever Brielle passed. The nobility was divided. Some approached with cautious respect, recalculating their positions with the speed of people who had spent their lives reading political winds. Others retreated into cold silence. Lord Castian withdrew his bannermen to the eastern provinces without a word. The grain wagons resumed 3 days later, quietly, without apology or explanation. Brielle spent the first week after the trial learning to control what she had unleashed. The shift came more easily now, but it was wild, surging forward at moments of strong emotion and retreating when she tried to command it deliberately. Thessaly worked with her daily, patient, and methodical. Your wolf was sealed for 23 years, Thessaly reminded her when frustration mounted. She needs time to learn trust, just as you do. She nearly knocked over a bookshelf this morning because I got startled by a door slamming, Brielle muttered. Progress, Thessaly said dryly. The connection with Calum deepened in ways she had not anticipated. She could feel his emotions with increasing clarity, not just broad strokes, but fine detail. The quiet satisfaction when a council session went well. The sharp edge of frustration when border reports arrived late. The warm flare of something unguarded and tender every time she entered a room. He felt hers too. Once, when she stubbed her toe badly enough to swear, he arrived at her door within 2 minutes, slightly out of breath, hand on his sword. I am fine, she said, hopping on one foot. I kicked a table. He stared at her, then at the table, then back at her. I felt pain. I thought you were being attacked. By furniture. His mouth twitched. The furniture in this castle is several hundred years old. It could be hostile. She laughed, and the sound transformed his face. The hard lines softened, and for a moment he was not the king at all. Just a man standing in a doorway, looking at a woman who made him forget to be guarded. These moments accumulated like snowfall. He began finding reasons to be near her, a report that somehow required her opinion. A walk through the gardens to inspect the medicinal herb beds she oversaw now at Thessaly's suggestion. Evening meals in his chambers where conversation drifted from politics to memories to comfortable silence. One evening they sat by the fire in his study, Brielle curled in the large chair she had claimed as her own, barefoot, reading. He was at his desk, reviewing correspondence, but his pen had gone still. What are you looking at? She asked without lifting her gaze. You, he said simply. She looked up and found his gray eyes warm in the firelight, unguarded in a way that still surprised her. I was thinking, he said slowly, setting the pen down, about the night before the trial. When I came to your room. What about it? I told you that if I kissed you, I would not be able to pretend this was only political. You did. I was wrong, he said. It was never political. Not from the moment I saw you in the great hall with ash on your face and soap on your hands, and the most terrified, stubborn look I have ever seen on a human being. Her breath caught. You noticed the ash? I noticed everything. He stood from the desk and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so their faces were level. I noticed the way you gripped your hands together to keep them from shaking, the way you lifted your chin even though you were terrified, the way you looked at me like I had lost my mind, and I thought, she is right. I have absolutely lost my mind, and I do not care. Tears burned in her eyes. Calum. He took her hand. the same soap-cracked hand she had placed in his at the choosing, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "I love you," he said against her skin. "Not because of any of this. I love you because you are the bravest, most stubborn, most impossibly kind person I have ever known, and every day I spend with you makes me want to be worthy of the fact that you chose me back." "You are a king," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You do not need to be worthy of a maid." "You are not a maid," he said fiercely. "You are the woman who tore down a wall inside herself with her bare hands and set free something so magnificent it silenced an entire kingdom. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." She kissed him, soft and slow and certain, with none of the desperation of their first kiss. This was not a breaking point. This was a beginning. The mating ceremony took place under a full moon in the castle courtyard, witnessed by the court and the kingdom beyond. Brielle wore gold, not the heavy ceremonial kind, but a simple gown that caught the moonlight and turned it warm. Caleb wore black, as always, but had abandoned the silver circlet in favor of nothing at all, just a man standing before his mate. The vows were ancient and simple. The mating marks were exchanged before the entire court, and the golden thread between them flared into something permanent, something unbreakable. When it was done, Brielle's wolf surged forward unbidden. She shifted in a cascade of light, and beside her, Caleb shifted too, enormous and dark as midnight. They stood together in the courtyard, gold and shadow, and the court watched in awed silence. Then the golden wolf pressed her nose to the dark wolf's muzzle, and a sound rose from the assembled wolves. Not applause, a howl. One voice, then 10, then 100, rising into the night sky until the castle rang with it. Healing was not a single moment, it was a season. Brielle learned to control her shift over the following months, guided by Thessaly's patience and Caleb's steadying presence. She learned to sit in council meetings without feeling like an imposter. She learned to meet the gazes of nobles who had once looked through her as though she did not exist. She never forgot what it felt like to scrub floors. She kept the old comb on her dresser in the royal chambers, beside a new one made of ivory that Caleb had given her. When he asked why she kept the old one, she said, "Because she is part of me, too. The girl who owned nothing and expected nothing. I will not pretend she did not exist." He understood. He always understood. Some mornings, she woke before him and watched him sleep. The Alpha King of Valtheris, feared across the realm, curled toward her in his sleep like a compass finding north, one hand resting on her hip, his breath warm against her shoulder. Other mornings he woke first and watched her. She knew because she could feel his gaze, warm and wondering, and she would smile before she opened her eyes. "Stop staring at me," she murmured one such morning. "No," he said. She opened her eyes. He was propped on one elbow, his dark hair falling across his forehead, looking at her with a look that still, after all these months, made her heart stumble. "You have ash on your face," he said. "I do not." "I know," he replied, "but I fell in love with a woman who did, and I like to remember." Brielle smiled, pulled him down by the collar of his sleep shirt, and kissed him in the warm morning light. Outside, the kingdom was at peace. Inside, the golden wolf slept contentedly beside the dark one, curled together, finally home.